Peter, thanks very much for talking to TJ today. This is our latest video interview where we talk to interesting people from around the spectrum of L&D, from the world of coaching, of course, technology, well-being. But today we're focusing on coaching and everything within that realm, as well as a bit of leadership as well. So
yes,
let's talk about how you got to where you are at the moment. So you've done a lot of work as an interim CEO, turning businesses around, that kind of thing. How did you come to, after that, get involved in the world of coaching?
well, interesting. I was sort of involved in coaching whilst I was doing the turnaround work. Rescuing companies from the edge of bankruptcy is very stressful. And so I hired my own coach, and I found that very valuable. In fact, so much that whilst I was practicing as a CEO, I decided to get trained as a coach. And in fact, became one of the first master coaches and mentors trained in Europe. And then as a result of that, I found that I reflected on my career, because I'd worked in the oil industry with Esso, I'd worked in Mars, the FMCG business, I'd worked in automotive work, and I'd also been a venture capitalist, all very successful companies. And I tried to work out what the common link was, and it turned out to be people. And so that's really coincided with me choosing to become a coach. I found introducing a coaching culture very helpful, even in turnaround. And so much so that I then decided to go on a personal retreat in the New Forest for a week and discover who I was. Quite a bizarre experience, but very, very fulfilling. And out of that, I discovered my identity, which for me is Pathfinder. Identities, I've done this sort of work with clients since, and it tend to come up with one or two words. But for me, what Pathfinder meant, which relates to the coaching, is that when I look back at my life, I'd realized I'd always enjoyed helping people think through a better future than where they were, and then helping them find their path to that future. And so when I had this revelation that I was Pathfinder, it resonated with me very deeply. And as a coach, and also interestingly, as a turnaround CEO, I found that commonality. In both cases, I was being a pathfinder. When I'm rescuing a company from bankruptcy, I'm showing it a better future of existing, and I'm helping it and the employees find the path to it. But when I'm coaching an individual, the same thing happens. So I found that these two careers sort of came together, and also discovering I was Pathfinder gave me this true north. And really out of that, I decided that I really wanted to sort of leave a legacy. And my mission, personal mission that emerged from that, is to help 20 million people across 20 different countries achieve and celebrate more success with less stress. And so for me, this turnaround work and being a coach just made so much sense together. And ultimately, that then led to the idea of how could we give coaching to more people than just the bosses, because people like me as a coach are expensive. And that then led on to sort of other things.
Well, that kind of leads perfectly into question two, which is, I think the perception of coaching is often that it's for C-suite positions, maybe not exclusively, but certainly kind of higher up management, and it can be unattainable for a lot of people. So how can doing this virtually make it more widely available?
Well, yeah, great question. For a start, it is right that typically it's only C-suite people who get a full-time, well, not a full-time, but a professionally qualified coach. Also, interestingly, I think up until maybe 5 years ago, if you weren't very good, maybe if you'd been over-promoted or you needed help to stop bugging people, you might be given a coach in a sort of a negative sense. And I think typically now coaches are seen as a very positive force. But I think the challenge with coaching is that it is so expensive. And also you only typically see a coach maybe once every 4 weeks, even if it's virtually. And so the concept came up. It actually came up in a drunken evening that I had with John Cleese in Las Vegas, would you believe? Because I'd just taken over his company, Video Arts International. It was on the edge of bankruptcy, and my job was to save it as a CEO. And there we were in the Picasso restaurant at the Bellagio Hotel. where every picture, incidentally, is a genuine Picasso. Quite a bizarre place to be.
Wow.
And he sort of jokingly said to me, well, of course, Peter, training doesn't bloody work unless you make it funny. And clearly he's very famous for his video art always being funny. And I said, well, my frustration is the coaching's just for the bosses. He then challenged me to sort it out, leaving out swear words. That's all he said. And so then I thought, well, if you could take the cost and the scarcity of the human coach out of coaching, you would massively reduce the cost. And potentially then you could give coaching to everyone instead of just to the bosses. And to cut a long story short, and many years and a lot of investment, supported partially by the government, I must say, we've come up with this concept of emulated coaching, what we call e-coaching for short, where it's AI, it's machine learning and some other clever technology. So there is no human involved, which means you can give it to everyone, not just the bosses. But also in some ways it's even better, because I know some coaches and they have an off day. They have other clients. They have other commitments. They're certainly not available 24/7. You normally have to book them up. Whereas a virtual coach, it's available 24/7. And they never have an off day. And so in some ways, this coach is even better than a normal one. And also, of course, there's no embarrassment. One of the most common questions I get asked by male, middle-aged or older clients is, should I leave my wife or my mistress? Which seems a bit bizarre, but that's probably the most common question. But also, clients sometimes are reluctant to ask the truth. And what we've found is that in many of our clients where we've put this VIC or virtual interactive coach in, the AI-driven coach, whilst HR go round or L&D go round and ask senior executives, what are the skills that you want us to help you with training? And they normally come up with a normal tosh about, I want to be a better leader, there's conflict in my team, how can I influence people? Which of course they need those skills. However, when they can go into a system with no human involved, in the privacy of their own laptop, what do they ask for? They say, how do I make small talk? How do I overcome self-limiting beliefs? Tell me about imposter syndrome and how I can escape its clutches. And so what's interesting is, even when you've got a coach, if it's a human coach, there's that slight concern about, well, how confidential is this? Especially if the coach is coaching more than one person in the same organization. So the idea of having a computerized coach who emulates the coaching experience, it's an incredibly powerful concept. And our clients are finding it absolutely extraordinary, the way that it drives productivity. And I think one of the challenges of L&D and training in the past has been, how do you link all the good work that we do with shifting the profit needle in the boardroom? How can you articulate all of the bums on seats and the very cleverly crafted and delivered learning programs? How does that convert into productivity, return on investment, and financial benefits that the CFO will sign up to? And we found that with the electronic coach, the virtual coach, we can create the metrics which give that link. And I think that is in some cases, that's a real breakthrough. And we can demonstrate that when people use VIC to help them recruit, the quality of the recruitment is better. The Harvard Business Review says that if you make a bad senior recruit and you then have to fire them because they didn't fit in the culture, for example, that can cost you 5 times the annual salary. And so because we can track who has used what skills, for example, for recruitment, that becomes a hard benefit, because when people use emulated coaching, the quality of the recruitment goes up and the number of people that have to be fired goes down. Often people are finding that instead of having to attend a full, maybe 2-day training course, what they're finding is that they can get maybe 80% of the benefit from just 20% of the time investment by going online. They don't have to stay away from their family. They don't have an expensive hotel. And also they get it when they want it without having to delay the delay of attending a face-to-face training course. So I think there are massive places for face-to-face training. We're a leadership development company, so we still do face-to-face training, or will do after COVID. But I think this concept of having a virtual coach who is also the subject matter expert on over 600 topics is a really interesting breakthrough in how we can help training, trainers, and learning and development make a credible link through to boardroom KPIs.
Do you mind if I ask a question we hadn't planned?
Of course.
It's kind of related to what you just said, actually, which is, and you've sort of answered it in a slightly different way, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think that's it for face-to-face coaching then? Or, obviously, e-coaching is an incredible development and you're getting really good results for all the reasons you've just laid out. But do you think there's going to be still a place for face-to-face coaching, or are we looking at kind of a hybrid future and that sort of thing?
I suspect you're right. I suspect a hybrid or blended approach. So we still do, when we're allowed to with lockdown, we still do face-to-face coaching. There is nothing to beat face-to-face coaching, because when you're face-to-face, you do build a stronger relationship, but also little things like when I'm coaching, I look at people's feet, because I don't know if you know, but feet are the part of your body furthest away from your brain. They are the least you control consciously. And if I'm talking, this is maybe a tip for anyone who's in a meeting. If you're in a meeting and someone's feet are pointing out the window or at the door, and that's, if you're in front of them and they're choosing not to point their feet at you, but elsewhere, that's a slight giveaway. And therefore, when you're face-to-face and you're coaching, you pick up much more subtleties in the tonalities, the body language, what's said and what isn't said. Now, a lot of that you can do online. And in fact, we have got examples of how to coach people online within the Vic system. It is not as good, ultimately, it is not as good as face-to-face coaching. And so if you're coaching a chief executive, maybe, whether it's 100 employees, 1,000 employees, 100,000 employees, it is worth investing in face-to-face with that person. However, that can be blended with online coaching, by which I mean a meeting like this, where you use Zoom. Once you've built the relationship, you've got some of the shorthand, you've built that trust so that you can ask really challenging questions. Things like, who are you? Who do you want to be? Who must you stop being so that you can become the person you want to be? Quite deep questions. If you've had one or two face-to-face meetings, you can then do that stuff online. And then if on top of that, you use this concept of virtual coaching, what it means is you can reserve the time when you're actually coaching for personal and business transformation. And that's what coaching, that's the potential of coaching. And so sometimes, a chief executive will say to me, Peter, look, you're a key international keynote speaker and motivational speaker. I've got a big presentation. Can you coach me? And I'm thinking, well, that's skills transfer. That's training. That's not what coaching's about. However, they're the client. So what I can now do is to say, well, look, why don't you go into Vic, the virtual interactive coach, our emulated coaching system, ask Vic for help on basic presentation skills, advanced presentation skills, things like the secret structure of how to give a presentation that gives a standing ovation, lots of stuff like that. Consume that whenever you want, in the back of your chauffeur-driven car, on the 736 from Waterloo, at home on a Sunday evening, whenever. And then I can then spend some of my coaching time with you on how you will use it. So in fact, I think there is still a role, definitely a role for face-to-face coaching, but I think that can be blended with Zoom coaching, and it can be blended with what we're calling virtual coaching, where there is no human involved, and that's closer to skills acquisition. But I think the big opportunity of this emulated coaching, e-coaching, is you can give the power of coaching to everyone in an organization, and that simply has not been viable before.
So you've worked as a turnaround CEO. Now you've developed a virtual interactive coach. Where do these sit with the things that you're most proud of in terms of what you've achieved in business? And what can people who are going to be watching this, what advice have you got for them in terms of what you're most proud of in your business achievements?
Sure. Well, I guess there are probably two elements there. One is I've generated over £1 billion of shareholder value. So that's both as a turnaround CEO and doing one or two other activities as well. So I'm very proud of that. I've written 7 books, one of which is a very popular one called Houston, We May Have a Problem, which various very senior industrialists have said has helped them. So it's nice to have had that impact. My personal mission, though, to help 20 million people across 20 countries achieve and celebrate more success with less stress. When I've achieved that, I will be very, very proud. But to be honest, I think sometimes it's the personal feedback I get from members of Vic as to how I have touched their lives. And I think it was about 3 weeks ago, I got an email from a senior female executive, and she said something like, I've always been scared of presenting. And so when my mother died and I was asked to give the eulogy, I was terrified. But I went into Vic. I found out advice on what to say, what not to say when dealing with other people with bereavement. I found advice on how to give presentations, advice on how to chill out before actually giving the presentation. And she then said, despite it being in a church, everyone clapped. And she said she is now actively seeking opportunities to present. And she said, this has held my career back because she's been suffering from imposter syndrome that she cannot present. And what she's now discovered is she can present with real emotion and move an audience. And so in a way, I'm really proud that Vic has helped that individual, in their private life as well as in their work life. But it's almost as if we've unlocked the chains of the self-limiting beliefs that were holding her back. And I'm sure now that she's got this confidence to be able to present, that is bound to help her career moving forward. So to me, glimpses into the humanity of helping people, that to me is at least as valuable as the fact that, I've generated a lot of shareholder value over the years.
On to our final question, and about more positives again, actually. Where do you think, we live in, we always live in uncertain times, but this year particularly, I'd say. So what positives can we take from what's happened this year? What can we take into next year? And how particularly can learning and development professionals lead on all of this and make sure that we do take some positive action next year?
Yes, of course. I think at a high level, first of all, as a turnaround guy, I know that when you're in a crisis, you drive innovation, you drive progress, and you make more changes, positive changes when there's a crisis, because you have to, than in a status quo when we all tend to get lazy. So I suspect that whilst this has been a horrendous year in many, many ways, we will probably look back at it and say this was a time of massive change, and a lot of the change is better. A lot of shops on the high street have probably got lazy, and it's time for them to be refreshed with new ideas. I think also for the world of HR and L&D and training in particular, this will have turned out to have been one of the pivotal tipping points in our profession, because I think L&D in particular had sort of got stuck in that it found it very difficult to have grown-up discussions with chief executives and CFOs where they would listen. And I think most CEOs do believe that training is important, but when times get tough, they tend to cut the budget because it's easy and there's no immediate impact. Because COVID has proved to us that managers now have to get better, they have to be more compassionate, they have to be more inspiring, they have to be more empathetic. And these are new skills that most managers have never actually been trained in before. And in order to get that done, I think we have all, as a profession, had to relate to the board and the CEO and CFO to say, we have a danger of losing people. They will either become mentally or physically unwell if we don't look after them. They might resign to our competition who's looking after them and training them better than we are. And the CEOs and CFOs sort of recognize that. And if we can now move that debate on and almost reinvent L&D as what I think it should be LD&P, learning, development, and productivity. possibly profit, but that's pedantic. And if the L&D community and the professionals can recognise that at last we are being taken seriously in the boardroom, that CEOs and CFOs recognise we have to upskill management, we probably have to upskill everyone else, because if you don't keep learning, you're simply not going to be earning into the future. And I think it's a shift from boring long, so 2-day courses into bite-sized resources. I think that is a very positive step forward. And I think it's also from turning training into a how many bums have we got on the seats, sort of measuring the input, to measuring the output, that says if we hadn't gone in and helped people to get through the COVID winter with resilience skills, equipping managers with compassion and empathy and other remote working skills, then our productivity would have dropped, would have had more mental illness, we would have lost more people to competitors. And therefore, I actually think that, I'm a great believer. It's not what happens to you in life, like COVID, it's how you choose to react to what happens to you. And I think anyone in L&D who chooses to reframe what's happening as a real opportunity, and to start linking any L&D or any, in fact, HR activity to how can we link this to the key performance indicators that our CEO and our CFO are interested in. Because you see, if we don't believe ultimately our work helps the share price, we shouldn't be doing it. And I think as a profession, we've almost been lazy in not thinking through what are those linkages. They are there, we just have to find them. And I think if, for example, we can shorten the gap between identifying a skills gap and closing the skills gap, that is worth money, because you can deal with problems sooner before they get bigger and out of hand. You can equip someone with the skills in the moment when they need it. Now, there is a formula there. There is an equation there that we can, if only we've got the nous to pull our thoughts together. And I think it'd be great to do as a profession, maybe even through the TJ, then that would be awesome, so that we can all talk boardroom KPIs. Because when that happens, I think there's a real opportunity potentially for LD&P to report directly into the CEO, not via HR. And I think that would be a very interesting debate to have. Does L&D want to stay a subset of HR with no direct link to the board? Or do we want to go separate and say, look, we are a serious business unit. We happen to deliver profit through training. Instead of saying, oh, no, we're not to do with profit, we train. I said, well, come on. It's an opportunity to consider anyway.
Yeah, a whole nother discussion there. And I think a lot of L&D departments would consider themselves or want to be considered separate. But yeah, Peter,
I think it's the right way to go.
Yeah, me too, definitely. Maybe we can follow up with another talk about that. But for the moment, thank you ever so much for your time. And very clear from the background how well Vic's doing in terms of awards and placements and prizes and things like that. So I'm glad it's going really well. And yeah, thanks again for talking to TJ.
My pleasure, John.
Cheers.